All right, brothers and
Yeah.
sisters, get ready, truth seekers and curious minds. Today we're diving deep, deep, deep into history, mystery, and a little bit of controversy. None other than Rod Meldrum. How are you doing?
We don't really know where the world is gonna go, but now everybody knows that you can't stop for too long. Got to keep going. Don't really know where the world is gonna go.
I'm fantastic. How are you doing?
I'm good.
Fantabulific, actually.
What's that?
Fantabulific. It's fantastic, terrific, and fabulous all at the same time.
That's good. That's good. I hope so. So that will make good programming if you're in that kind of mood.
That's right.
But brothers and sisters, we know Rod. We know him from the Firm Conference, which is coming up again in a couple months. I'll be plugging that soon
September. Yep.
in September. But we know you as an explorer, that you've never met a question too big, a theory too wild, maybe, even a Book
No.
of Mormon artifact too ancient. Um, this is corny. I got this from AI. I'm like, can we? I'm about to just scrap this. But I would say, whether you agree or disagree with Rod, I don't think people look at ancient America the same way again. But I want y'all to grab your Indiana Jones hats and let's meet in the middle here. Because I was asking you the other day, I said there's a lot of folklore and legends and just tales of Quetzalcoatl is one. In Central America, in Mesoamerica, Christ figures. And I said, well, what about North America? What about the heartland? What about up here where many of us believe things happened? And you said, yeah, there are things.
And I probably want to preface our discussion here by basically saying that if when you go down to Central America, and I probably should have some photos put up here, but most people know this. You go down to Mesoamerica, you go to Chichen Itza and Tulum, any of these places, you're going to see the Mayan language, the Mayan linguistic system, basically the glyph system that they use. You're going to see that all over everything, and it's on practically every wall, on every edifice, on every carving. It's everywhere. Now in Central America, so these glyphs are like all over the place. But if you go to the Book of Mormon, actually you find it's just the opposite. In fact, the Nephites were the ones that had a written language. The Lamanites didn't have a written language. It was all primarily being passed down verbally, orally through from generation to generation. And we know this is the case with the Native American peoples, basically in North America and so forth. But in Central America, they had a written language, and it was actually all over everything. In the Book of Mormon, if the Book of Mormon account is being followed, you really are not going to find much in the way of written language at all in that civilization, because not only did the Lamanites not keep a written history, it was all done orally. But they also they were just determined to destroy anything that the Nephites actually created,
Right.
right? They were hunting down the Nephites, and they said we have to hide the records, because if the Lamanites find it, they're going to destroy it. And so we really wouldn't expect to find hardly anything. And it's amazing that we do find some things, but mostly what we have to do with Native American legends that have been passed down generation to generation through oral history. Now we all have played the game, telephone, whatever, where you tell somebody something, and then they tell somebody, and they tell somebody, and they tell somebody, and within 5 or 10 different generations of telling somebody something, you realize how much information is lost or misunderstood or mistranslated or whatever. And so oral histories are very difficult. So there's a lot of nuance and so forth there. So I don't take a lot of time and actually don't use a lot of oral passed down information as hard evidence. But there've been those who've actually looked into whether or not there's any evidence for Christ in the Americas, or specifically in North America. And probably the book that everybody's going to be thinking about at this point in time is this book right here. It's called He Walked the Americas. Okay. He Walked the Americas by L. Taylor Hansen. She was an author. It was kind of funny because I think her name was Lorraine, if I remember correctly. But back in the day when this was actually first published, it wasn't really cool for women to be authors, or they weren't taken very seriously. So she
Right.
published under L. Period Taylor Hansen, which sounds more like a man's name. This is back in 1963, the year I was born, is when this book first came out. And so this is He Walked the Americas. This is from Amherst Press in Amherst, Wisconsin, 1963. But if you go to the very first contents page, this is all about the Americas. This is Americas plural, right?
Right.
So she's talking about North, Central, and South America. And she has examples. So she literally studied and went and actually met with many of these tribes, as I understand it. She did, lots of information here. And let me just kind of just give you a couple of quick things. So in North America, she has on page 41 about the Thanksgiving ceremony. This is in Georgia.
Hmm.
The prophet first sees the future in Etowah Mounds, and that's in 43. That's in Georgia. The Golden Rule. This was information that she got out of Oklahoma. The Lost Fawn, which is information she got out of West Virginia. This is a Cherokee tradition. The prophet tells of his birth in Oklahoma. Background knowledge. This is Mississippi. This is in Mississippi where she got this information from. So Mississippi Indians.
Right.
Random memories. She got this from the Pawnee. Okay. The prophet makes a second visit to the Pawnee. The healer travels to the Puant Nation, and that's in Mississippi. The Seneca legend in New York. The Ojibwa Council talks about that coming from Michigan. And the Old Chippewa Speaks from Michigan. The Voice of Dakota, that's in South Dakota. The Southerners speak in Oklahoma. The Legend of the Sacred City, the Cheyenne speak in Wyoming. The Council is closed in Michigan, the Western Seaboard, and that's Washington, Oregon, and California. The Hopi Snake Priest in Arizona. The Legend of the Dene, which is Navajo, Utah, and New Mexico, basically areas. The Zuni and the Yaqui, which is in Arizona and New Mexico. A lot of these are actually in Central America, but that's kind of the as you break down this book, basically that's the ones that are in North America. And all of these legends that she has in this book talk about a creator, basically talk about a great prophet or other information that indicates potentially a visit from Christ there. Now, as you mentioned, I think in the beginning, we don't have a problem with the idea that Quetzalcoatl and the feathered serpent and the descending God and so forth, and the bearded God that is in Central America and so forth. I fully believe that that's probably Christ, because when he was with the Nephites, he said, now I was just in Jerusalem, and now I'm here with you. And he says, and my Father has commanded me to go to other sheep. So there are other sheep
Right.
beyond the Nephites, right? And so if he actually followed the commandment from his father, which I'm sure he did, then he would have gone to other places. My little sister served her mission in Japan, and there's a legend there of a bearded god that came down and taught them things. So, in India, I mean, they're all over the world, there are these legends that persist to this day among these people talking about this visitor that came into their lands and taught them important things. So, are those kind of traditions here? I'm going to reference, I just referenced that book, but I'm going to reference two other books, which I think are just fascinating. This is a national bestseller. This is Charles Mann. This is the second edition here, but it's 1491. Of course, we know, Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. So what this book is about is what was America like before Columbus.
Interesting.
And in this book, again, it's a national bestseller, New Revelations of the Americas before Columbus. If we go back here to this point, it talks about here in this, they have an entire chapter here. What page is this on? This is, if you want to look it up yourself, it's on page 379, and it's called, I don't know if you can see that or not,
The
the
Great
Great
Law
Law
of
of
Peace.
the Great Law of Peace, right? They're talking about this great law of peace that was had among the Haudenosaunee peoples. which are basically the Algonquin speaking language groups of Native Americans in North America, which if you've been following my research at all, you know that that happens to be the particular language group of people who have the haplogroup X DNA type that links them to every Hebrew population on the planet. Okay, the Ashkenazi Jews, the Sephardic Jews, the Libyan
Right,
Jews, Moroccan
right.
Jews. These are the people that have those 5 markers in their DNA that links them to these Middle Eastern populations. But in this, there's a couple of places. I'm just going to read a couple of things so that they're not taking anything out of context here. Well, it's a whole chapter. We're not going to read the whole chapter, but just a few things. He says there was a loose military alliance among the Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, Mohawks, and then after 1720, the Tuscarora Indians. So there was the 5, what they call the 5 civilized tribes to begin with, and then later on they were called the six civilized tribes after the Tuscarora actually came up. That was clear back in or clear up to 1720. So it says from it talks about the environment that was going on with the 5 nations, how they were fighting and warring amongst each other. They had the cultural trinity of maize, beans, and squash appeared to be in the main area, taking up agriculture. The Finger Lakes people, by now consolidated to 5 main groups, lined the region's hills with farms. The population rose, and it has happened time and again when human societies make the transition from foraging to farming. The burgeoning cultures took to fighting with each other because of the abduction, injury, or death of a family member who had to be revenged. Every violent incident led to a spiral of brutal tit-for-tat skirmishes. From this brutal environment, a heroic figure emerged. Now listen to the description here. Again, these are not LDS. This guy is a consummate historian, Charles Mann. He's a fantastic historian, highly renowned, right? He says this historic figure emerged. The name of this person is called Deganawida, the Peacemaker. That's spelled Deganawadah, Deganawida,
Okay.
the Peacemaker. So little is known about Deganawida's life that archaeologists disagree about whether he actually walked the earth or belongs entirely in the realm of legend. Okay. Various traditions provide different accounts of his background. This is because of the oral history being passed down. It's not oral history it can wander a long ways from what was originally there. It says, but most say that Deganawida was not a member of the 5 nations. He was an outsider, in other words. He was a shamanic outsider who was born to a virgin girl in a village far to the north.
Wow.
Whoa. A
Wow.
virgin girl born someplace else, right?
And
Abjuring
and
his
and you
past.
and you think about these people, they don't know their geography. They don't know the geography of how big the earth is. So they're just saying
Yeah.
the village to the north.
Well, I think these people do a lot more than we think they did.
Okay,
Because,
okay.
yeah, but yeah, when they say village to the north, that's just something that could be. I mean, they don't really know where he came from.
Right,
They think
right.
it could have been from the north. Abjuring his past, he floated from his home village in a canoe made from a white stone and wandered the Adirondack and Allegheny forest, then a place of constant violence and apparently intermittent cannibalism. Okay, that's what they thought. But the Ganawida had a message of peace. He couldn't easily promulgate it, though, because he had a tragic flaw, a severe speech impediment, perhaps a stutter. Somehow he connected with Ayanthwatha as Onondaga, and Onondaga, who was a famous orator. So anyway, so he's talking about this a speech impediment. It kind of reminds me a little bit about Moses and Aaron, kind of thing, where you have somebody who is a better orator and whatever, but the prophet ends up being still the prophet. Anyway, so he talks about how they formed. He helped them with a spokesperson. The 2 men confronted Todoaho, the powerful leader of the Onondaga, a shaman in his own right, and a warrior leader who was so deeply locked into the logic of prideful violence that he regarded the thought of peace as a betrayal. In the ensuing conflict, Todoaho killed Ayathawa's 3 daughters, nearly derailing the quest for peace. Other versions have the girls killed in a raid by another group. Whatever the circumstances, he vowed that no parent should ever experience such a loss again and rededicated himself to spreading Deganawida's ideas. Over the years, Deganawida and Watha persuaded the Seneca, Cayuga, the Oneida, and Mohawk to form an alliance instead of constantly fighting. But these two continued to refuse. In a parley, Deganawida took a single arrow and invited Todohaho to break it, which he did easily. Then he bundled together 5 arrows and asked Tohodaho to break the lot. He couldn't. In the same way, Deganawida prophesied that 5 nations, each weak on its own, would fall into darkness unless they all banded together.
Interesting.
Soon after Deganawida's warning, a solar eclipse occurred. The shaken Tohodaho agreed to add the Onondaga to the nascent alliance, but he drove a hard bargain anyway, and so forth. So bottom line is that here's this guy who comes from a virgin. He's not from there. He teaches them this great law of peace. He teaches them to stop doing revenge and basically and work together. He teaches them if they all stick together, they will all be a stronger unit or stronger nation. And then he basically just kind of disappears. Okay. It goes on for an entire chapter here, but he tells them that about in creating this league, there was a formal expression of regional tradition. The sachems of Indian groups of the eastern seaboard were absolute monarchs in theory, but in practice, wrote colonial leader Roger Williams, they will not conclude of aught unto which the people are adverse. The league was predicated, in short, on the consent of the governed, without which the entire enterprise would collapse. Compared to the despotic societies that were the Norman Europe and Asia, the Haudenosaunee were a libertarian dream. In a sense, it was also a feminist dream. The 5 nations were largely governed internally by the female clan heads, and the Great Law explicitly ordered council members to heed the warnings of your women relatives. Failure to do so would lead to their removal. The equality granted to women was not only the kind envisioned by contemporary Western feminists. Men and women were not treated as equivalent. Rather, the sexes were assigned to 2 separate social domains. Neither were subordinate to the other. No woman could be a war chief, and no man could lead a clan. Anthropologists debate the extent of the women's clout under this separate but equal arrangement, but according to the University of Toledo historian Barbara Mann, author of Iroquois Women, the female-led clan council set the agenda of the league. Men could not consider a matter not sent to them by the women. Women who held title to all the land and its produce could vote down decisions by the male leaders of the league and demand that an issue be reconsidered. Under this regime, women were so much better off than their counterparts in Europe that 19th century U.S. feminists like Lucretia Mott, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Matilda Jocelyn Gage, all of whom lived in the Haudenosaunee County country, drew inspiration from their lot. So basically, they're just saying that these Native Americans had this way of including both men and women. They were separate. They weren't trying to make men women and women men like we are doing today, but they each had their role. But they both had equal authority in how they were governed.
Right.
Gotcha. Okay. So this is on page 384 here, the Great Law of Peace in 1491. And I'm just going to read this last part. It says, but the Indians of the western seaboard institutionalized their liberty to an unusual extent. The Haudenosaunee, especially, but many others too. Their whole constitution breeds nothing but liberty, said colonist James Adair of the Anagunawaya Cherokee. Important historically, these were the free people encountered by France and Britain, personifications of democratic self-government so vivid that some historians and activists have argued that the Great Law of Peace directly inspired the U.S. Constitution.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Okay. And where did they get this Great Law of Peace? From this Deganawida. And where did Deganawida come from? Well, it came from a virgin, basically a virgin mother who was not part of their tribe. He came into their tribe as an outsider. Now, Senator Mike Lee has a book.
Even when you say the Great Law of Peace, I'm thinking of the Beatitudes that he's teaching in the Book of Mormon.
Yeah. So there's this book here. It's called the Senator Mike Lee, the Written Out of History, The Forgotten Founders Who Fought Big Government. Okay. I actually had a chance. In fact, I want to show you a couple of quick things here
Hmm.
before we get into this one. I'm gonna share a screen here with you. Okay, and it has to do with this concept here. So the first one I'm going to do here is actually from the Oneida tribe, I believe it is. And this is a video that they created. It's up on YouTube. You can actually check it out. It's called the Iroquois Confederacy of Nations, basically. And here it goes.
Mother Earth, you are the heartbeat of our soul, the land of our mothers and fathers, whose desire was to live in peace and freedom with each other and all living things. North America, where the people of the Longhouse established the great law of peace, acknowledging the rights of all people as a sacred way of life. My heart swells with a humble pride to know the legacy of freedom and democracy they created. Let the winds continue to spread the wings of true democracy to every corner of the earth. Let freedom ring. Yes, grandfather, let freedom ring.
So that's from the Oneida Nation, basically talking about how they have been recognized as being, an important part of this, the making of the United States Constitution because of this great law of peace,
Hmm.
right? I want to show you just one other little quick thing here because this is
Okay.
so powerful. All right, can you see that now?
Yeah.
Okay, so this, if anybody's been following my work for a few years, this is part of the St. George Temple Registry. When Wilford Woodruff had apparently a vision of a bunch of the founding fathers and so forth, and they started doing the temple work for them. In the first temple of this dispensation, that they were actually doing this kind of work, which was actually the St. George Temple. So we know the Kirtland Temple. They did some ordinances and things there, but and they did more of them, and they did the endowment in the Nauvoo Temple. But as far as doing work for the dead, that really started for the first time in earnest there in St. George, Utah. So this is from clear back in 1877, and the first part of it had a bunch of the founding fathers in it. This is page 196 and 197 of the ledger. But and I had a friend of mine actually that brought me the copies of this, and it had all these founding fathers and so forth. And I was like, whoa, it was pretty awesome to see who was being done there. And then I noticed a couple of Native American chief names that were being done there. Their work being done for them, baptism for the dead and so forth, and then also other ordinances. And I noticed these Native Americans over here on the left hand side. And I said, where's the next page? And he said, I didn't get that because I was just getting the founding fathers. I said, well, is there more over there? And he said, well, I don't know. So I went up to the church archives basically, and was able to get the microfiche that has this on there. And I found a lot more Native American chiefs. There was actually a
Wow.
total of 85 Native American chieftains that had their work done for them by Commodore Perry Lister, who was there in St. George, Liston. Anyway, but you can see over here on the left-hand side, you can see Joseph Brant, identified as an Algonquin chief from North America.
Hmm.
You see below him is Red Jacket, and then King Philip, then Pontiac, Tecumseh. Anybody recognize these names? Yeah.
Yes.
Going down there, you have Black Hawk, Powhatan, another I don't even can't even pronounce that one. Uncase, who is Mohican, Samoset, who is Wampanoag, Squanto, Massasoit, and so forth. If you keep going down a little bit further, you get to one that's called Canasatego. Canasatego, a Onondaga chief. Now, this Canasatego, he was specifically mentioned in another book called Gods of War, Gods of Peace. Um, and it was told in Gods of War, Gods of Peace, how the founding fathers had gotten to a point where they had argued down to a stalemate,
Hmm.
and they weren't sure how they were going to get past this, and they basically were at an impasse, and they actually ended up they're about to just dismiss and go their ways, when all of a sudden this Native American chieftain walks into the room there in I believe it was in Philadelphia, when at the Independence Hall when they were having these discussions and so forth, and he began to scold the founding fathers for their lack of understanding of proper procedures in government. And he was, and he came up and said, "Listen, I'm going to teach you how to do this." Now, previous to this, there was, believe it was Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, and possibly there's another founding father that actually had gone out and met with some of these Iroquoian, the Five Nations who are living under the Great Law of Peace. They went out and actually talked to them, and Benjamin Franklin actually wrote about this. He wrote several letters or articles.
Hmm.
The only surviving civilization that is using this great law of peace, and how applicable it would be to use it in the United States Constitution. And so that's part of the reason why this is they are given some credit for the establishment of the Constitution of the United
Wow.
States, coming from the
Wow.
Great Law of Peace. But this Canasatego spent several days with the founding fathers. Now, Mike Lee talks about this experience. Let me share with you a little bit about what he has. And again, this is quite a long, it's a whole chapter 4. It says, "Join or die." Canasatego, Ben Franklin, and the Confederacy of the Wilderness. This is from Canasatego, 1744. Okay. It says, "Our wise forefathers established union and amity between the Five Nations. This has made us formidable. This has given us great weight and authority with our neighboring nations. We are a powerful confederacy. And by your observing the same methods our wise forefathers have taken, you will acquire much strength and power. Therefore, whatever befalls you, do not fall out with one another." Unquote. This
Amazing.
is one of these guys who today many of these Native American peoples were considered to be ignorant savages. Are
Right.
you kidding? Look at this. And then this is Benjamin Franklin's response. He says, "It would be a very strange thing if 6 nations of ignorant savages should be capable of forming a scheme for such a union to be able to execute it in such a manner as that it has subsisted for ages and appears indissoluble. And yet a like union should be impractically for 10 or a dozen English colonies."
Right. I was just thinking about that.
Benjamin Franklin, 1751.
The Europeans are calling them savages, yet they're keeping the peace much better and longer than any European nation at that time.
Yeah. He says, "If you're a student of the Constitution America's founding, you have no doubt heard of Baron de Montaigne and John Locke, two of the most influential thinkers of the period. You've heard of the Magna Carta and European Enlightenment. You've read how our founding generation looked back to ancient Greece and Rome and studied their political philosophies. But one name you might not be familiar with is Canasatego, an Iroquois chief who played outsized role in shaping the way at least one founding father thought about republican government. The founding father influenced by Canasatego was, to put it mildly, one who left a lasting impression. No one typified that enterprising, experimental, and rebellious spirit that permeated the American colonies better than the ambitious Philadelphia printer, Benjamin Franklin." Okay. This is the forgotten story of how the Iroquois developed one of the most unique and essential components of the future American Republic, called federalism. As their own law stated, this is from the Constitution of the Iroquois Nation. This is the direct quote from that. "5 arrows shall be bound together very strong, and each arrow shall represent one nation. As the 5 arrows are strongly bound, they shall symbolize the complete union of the nations. Thus are the 5 nations united completely and folded together, united in one head, one body, and one mind." That sounds interesting, right? One
Hmm.
head, one body, one mind. And then they established the Great Law of Peace. So it talks a little bit about how Canasatego was hunting and so forth. And then anyway, it talks a little bit about the Mohawks and Onondagas had for centuries been rivals and at times even enemies, fighting over hunting grounds. And though they were still separate people with fierce tribal loyalties, they were now allies as part of the Iroquois Confederacy. Canasatego had seen enough white men hunting on his lands without with wood and metal sticks that made loud noises, and he knew that the tribes would have to band together if they had a chance of protecting their lands and their people and preserving this great law of peace. Canasatego took pride in the resourcefulness and organizations of his people. His father and his father's father had passed down the story of the Iroquois nation's founding some 300 years earlier, and the many tribes in the area had previously been divided, and so forth. Anyway, um,
Well, you think about what the Book of Mormon ends about 600 AD. So it's not unfathomable that there's some conceptualized
thing that came all the way back. Yeah.
plan, and yeah, and it's not too far away that they still had this law of peace that could have been derived from people 1,000 years ago or even in between.
Yeah, he says it was not the Iroquois, at least not in recent history, since the Great Law of Peace had created the Iroquois Confederacy. The Great Law of Peace was a set of rules, a constitution of sorts, albeit an unwritten one. It was passed from generation to generation in oral traditions of its people, from chief to chief and sachem to sachem. It was depicted in pictographs on wampum belts made from seashells. To the Iroquois, the Great Law of Peace was as sacred as any written constitution could ever be. According to his people's legend, the Great Law began with the planting of the tree of great peace, a vast white pine in the heart of the Onondaga Nation. The Tree of Great Peace was the capital of the Iroquois Confederacy, located in the western regions of what white man dubbed the colony of New York. That was also where the Great Council met around a campfire and decided on political matters. This was where the leaders of the Six Nations, comprising the Iroquois Confederacy, the Mohawk, Seneca, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Tuscarora, and the Onondagas, met and deliberated with great solemnity. Decisions were made only after the tribal leaders had achieved unanimity.
Anonymity.
Yeah,
Anonymity.
unanimity. And the Great Law
Oh,
prescribed specific
okay.
procedural rules, and it allowed for vetoes and so forth. Anyway, so this is basically they're talking about this Great Law of Peace and this the Tree of Great Peace. And anyway, so he goes into a little bit more about that. I'm not going to go into too much more detail, but here's where he addresses Congress in July. By July 4th of 1744, dozens of wigwams stood in downtown Lancaster. Then Canasatego, let's see, brother, the governor of Maryland, he began. You went back to old times and told us that you have been in possession of the province of Maryland for about 100 years. Then Canasatego parried, but what is 100 years in comparison to the length of time since our claim began, since we came out of this ground? For we must tell you that long before 100 years, our ancestors came out of this very ground, and their children have remained here ever since. Anyway, so he's basically saying this is kind of our ground here, right? Anyway, so again, I don't want to read this whole thing, but the bottom line is this Canasatego had a huge impact on this whole thing. So these are the tribes here, going back to the St. George Temple Registry. You can see Canasatego is about in the middle on the left-hand side. That's the chief. That's his chieftain name right there. And then excuse me, that's a different tribe. Okay, so the Canasatego is there on the left-hand side, about in the middle, and he's an Onondaga. Now, interestingly enough, like I said, this is written up in Mike Lee's book, written out of history. This is actually he signed a copy of the book for me when I got this. Is Mike Lee and I, and this is the St. George Temple. And I had a friend of mine that when she saw this information, this research, I was doing a presentation down in St. George, and this kind of a big stadium seating place, and I showed a couple of pictures of this St. George Temple registry on the big screen in the front of the
Yeah.
place there. And this lady literally leaped up out of her chair and pointed at the screen. She says, "That's my people. Those are my people." I was like, "Okay, calm down, lady. It's okay." Right? And then she came up afterwards, and her name is Dolores Gagnon. She lives there in St. George, and she is part of the Iroquois Confederacy of the nations. I believe that
Wow.
she's Onondaga. Okay, but anyway, so I said, well, where do these names come from? Because what we found out was, or what she found out later on, is that she said, well, it shows all their baptism dates in 18 August of 1877. But she says, but the founding fathers, a lot of them had their actual endowment work done for them. And she says, where's the endowment work that was done for these Native American chiefs? And I said, I looked back and forth in the microfiche, and I couldn't find it. I couldn't find anything that had been done. So she set out to figure out, okay, has this been done, or were they only baptized? Because some of them, like George Washington and a couple of other individuals, were actually had their endowment work done. Not only that, but they actually were even ordained high priests,
Mm-hmm.
in this time frame.
Right.
Anyway, so the bottom line is that she asked me, and I said I don't know. So she actually began a deep search on this, and she found out that she got a hold of the church. They went through, and it took several months, and they basically said, we can't find any record of them having their endowments done, these Native American chiefs. And she says, well, okay, so why? And they said, well, probably because the day after these baptisms were done, Brigham Young passed away up in Salt Lake, and there was a telegram sent down to St. George, basically saying, "Hey, you know what? We're going to have a new president, new prophet of the church." And so Wilford Woodruff and those who and several of the other temple presidents, they actually left St. George and took their wagons and headed north to Salt Lake to be part of the changing of the guard, if you will.
Right.
And apparently they were there for 2 or 3 months, and then by the time they came back, they basically just forgot about these Native American chiefs, apparently.
Wow.
And
Not
so,
good. Not good.
so she said, well, what do we have to do to get this work done for them? And they said, well, are you Native American? And she said, yes, I'm Native American. And they said, well, then submit the names. So she submitted the names for all 85. Now, some of these, like Squanto and Massasoit and Red Jacket and so forth, they'd been done, before. But there's a lot of these names that nobody'd really ever heard before. She went and actually spent part of a summer up at her tribal headquarters up there in Canada, and actually was able to find and discover every single name that's on this list that apparently came in vision to Wilford Woodruff there in the St. George Temple. And so she began the process of having their names done. Now, there was a Native American.
That is so neat. That's amazing.
It was really cool. So there's this Native American branch down in the St. George area, and so she had a lot of those names go through that branch, and they did those names because they're Native people there. But she came to me in one of my expos and said, Ron, she says, I've got this one particular one of those chieftains that I think. She said, every time I try to give it out to somebody, I'm restrained from doing it. And she said, I feel like that you should be the one to do this name. And I said, okay, who is it? She says, I'm not going to tell you. Says, you come down with me, or you come down to St. George and meet me at the temple, and I will give you the name. And I said, okay. So a couple of weeks later, we actually did that. So this is actually her. She's standing next to me. This is Dolores right here. And then this is Shauna Cox on the left-hand side, and what's her name? I can't remember her name now. A friend here, and also Vince Newmeyer over here on my left-hand side, on the right side there. And she handed me the name, and I was just dumbfounded. Because in my very first DVD set that I did, probably 6 or 7, probably 10 years before that, back in what's it been, 2008. My 5 DVD set is when I actually talked about this Canasatego going. I'd read this in Gods of War, Gods of Peace, and how he had such an influence on the founding fathers and the establishment of the Constitution, right? And how he actually came in and called the founding fathers and kind of to repentance, if you will, and
Right.
told them this is how you do it, and he helped them get over that impasse that they were at and be able to move forward. And then he kind of just disappeared. They went looking for him again, and he just had left.
Interesting.
But it turns out that he has quite an amazing history. And I mean, he was married. He had his wife passed away, and he went into like a depression that basically ended up killing him. I mean, he literally
Wow.
died of a broken heart and so forth. But he was an amazing individual. And as I got to know his history a little bit better, um, I didn't know the history at the time when she gave me this name, but that's the name.
Oh my goodness. Canasatego.
Canasatego from Dolores Janet
Canasatego.
Gagnon from St. George. I did initiatory work was done in 2015, and then I did that in April on April the 6th. I thought it'd be an appropriate day to do that. And then we did his endowment on April 24th of the
Were you
same
pretty
year.
jazzed when she gave it to you? I bet you were
I was pretty
extremely.
blown away, but actually having gone through it, it was an incredible experience actually to go through for this great man, this individual, this Canasatego that actually basically helped to save the Constitution of the United States through his efforts and through his understanding of the great law of peace, which was brought forth by Deganawida, the Great Peacemaker, who
Right.
was born of of a virgin mother. I mean, it was just
Well, and if you think about it, I know he's not a prophet, but he was kind of this Canasatego. He's almost like a great, when you think about it, like Nephi or Moroni or Jacob,
yeah,
somebody that brought forth something very paramount.
yeah. Well, this is just a picture of John Little Bear. He's a Native American as well, and he and Dolores worked for some things, and he did a bunch of stuff on his own too. And anyway, this is walking into one of our conferences, and those are names. Ever since these Native American chiefs have had their endowments done, the number of names that have come forward to have work done for the Native peoples, deceased ancestors and so forth, has just exploded. Yeah, I
Wow.
think they talked about 180,000 names just started just pouring into temples all over the world to have these Native Americans done, have their work done for them. It was just awesome. So that just gives you an idea. That's just some of them that they brought into to the event there to hand out for people who wanted to help do these Native
Man,
American names. That
that's a
cool?
lot.
Anyway, so that's essentially. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. We'll go just back to our discussion here. So, what do you think?
Amazing. I've never heard of Deganawida. Wait, Deganawida. That's how you
The kind of
pronounce it.
weed.
I never heard
Yeah,
of Deganawida, and just the I I don't I never have believed in coincidences when it came to doing temple work. I've done my own genealogy and my own family history and took names to the temple because I'm, you know, second, third generation Latter-day Saint, so I don't have pioneer heritage in Utah. I've got most of my family are from the South and Oklahoma and Missouri and Alabama and Georgia. But anyway, to make a long story short, as I'm looking at those names of the Native Americans and just the story that's unfolded here, um, it feels the same. Those names were not in the temple for uh, that wasn't just by happenstance. You getting that name from your
yeah.
friend, that wasn't a coincidence. This is
It still blows
this
my
is
mind.
amazing.
It just still blows my mind that I was able to basically do the work for this individual that that's so instrumental in the saving of our Constitution,
Yeah.
actually the creation of our Constitution.
And uh, we would know more about Deganawida if it wasn't handed down verbally only, right?
Yeah,
But there
yeah.
are, you know, there's many other evidences. Wow, this has been amazing,
So
Rod.
we don't have the legend of the descending God and the feathered serpent and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
What we do have is the Native American oral histories and traditions have interesting correlations and possible similarities. We're not saying that this is absolute evidence that this was Christ, but because of it being an orally transmitted thing, a lot of plain and precious things are lost through oral history. But some things remain. I mean, there's some aspects of it that um, stay in there. So, it's really fascinating to me that have 1491 basically talking about that their history basically says that the peacemaker came of a virgin birth,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Amazing.
I mean, how many other people make that claim, right? I mean, who else besides
That's
Christ?
right. There's not very many legends or I don't know, iconic historical figures like that that came from that had a similar story. I think
Yeah,
there's one in China or Asia, but other than that, that could have been Christ too. Maybe they're all
yeah.
Christ.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably not a common thing to consider a virgin giving birth, right? I mean,
Right.
how does that happen even?
Exactly.
So anyway, so I think it's just fascinating, and again, we don't expect to see a lot of written language in the areas where the Book of Mormon was because the Lamanites were determined to destroy the Nephite written language. And so that's another actually feather in the cap of the Heartland research and another major downfall of the Mesoamerica stuff because they got writing everywhere.
That's
You
right.
know,
That's right.
that's not what the Book of Mormon says. Anyway,
No.
so listen, I appreciate you taking the time
Thank you.
to have this little conversation. I hope it's helpful for all of
Yes.
you. Just
This
want
is
to
a
do a
tender
little
little
quick shout
nugget.
out. If you want to learn more about this information, our main primary website is, of course, bookofmormonevidence.org. We would love to invite you to come to our big expo in September. We have, I think, 90 something speakers and 120 or 30 classes
That's right.
up at the Davis County Convention Center in Layton, Utah.
And I
We
will be
also
there. I will be speaking.
That's right. That's right. And then also, just if you really want to do deep dives into this stuff, if this is the kind of stuff that just really kind of gets your motor running and you want to learn more about the Book of Mormon like you've never learned before, then I really suggest that you go to our streaming website. We have over 1,800 now presentations by over 450 experts in every field that you can conceive of in the Book of Mormon that touches on. I mean, if you want to do a deep dive in any kind of different thing, you can find it there. And just it's nice because you don't have any commercials and so forth. If you do that, and basically it's like I think it's like under $8 a month for a subscription. And you
Yeah.
basically just you can subscribe to that and you can watch anything you want to. We've got some new cool stuff that's going out because we're just revamping and updating this. Hopefully it'll be actually fully going by the time this video is released, but it's in the next week or so. We'll be moving over to the brand new one, which is I know a lot of people have been trying to watch it and it's been okay, but it hasn't been really user friendly as it should be, and this is going to be awesome. So
Yeah.
yeah,
All
we're
right. Well,
excited.
the video is going out today. This is going out today.
Okay, well, it'll be another week or two probably before we get the streaming website really clicking along, but we've had to completely revamp it and make it's a fully custom website now. Before we were using a WordPress backdrop, and with that many videos and so forth, it was more than WordPress could deal with. So
Yeah.
we've had to revamp and do that. So appreciate everybody's patience, by the way. If you have been involved with that before. A lot of people have said, well, I don't want to deal with it, but now they should be able to do with that. So we hope we get a bunch of people subscribing back again that were a little disenchanted with it in the first place. So
All
thank you,
right.
Troy.
Thank you so much, Rod. You have a good one.
You bet. Have a good day.
All right. Bye.